Welcome, and thank you for joining Zonta International for this special webinar in celebration of Amelia Earhart Month. We hope today's session will be an interactive one, and we invite you to join the conversation. We will have dedicated time for questions at the end of today's session. However, please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please note that this webinar will be recorded and that the recording may include chat and comments. It is now my pleasure to introduce Zonta Club of Everett member, Catherine Cleland. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome again to you all. It's wonderful to see so many Zontans, Amelia Earhart Fellows, and friends with us today for this great conversation. Amelia Earhart Month is the time when our global Zonta International community celebrates the trailblazing spirit of Zontan and famed aviator Amelia Earhart. It's also the time to recognize and celebrate the accomplishments of our more than 1,700, yes, that's 1,700 Amelia Earhart Fellows from 76 countries around the world. Today, I'm honored to have 3 Amelia Earhart Fellows here to explore the connection between climate, energy, and the aerospace industry. Before we dive into our discussion, I would like to briefly introduce them. Dr. Jacqueline Nguyen is a 2018 Amelia Earhart Fellow from the United States. She is currently an assistant professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Elise Fahey is a 2015 Amelia Earhart Fellow from Australia. She is a senior scientist and technical project manager, climate resilient and sustainable energy systems at Hitachi Energy, a global technology leader at their research center in Switzerland. Dr. Anna Thomas is a 2017 Amelia Earhart Fellow from the United States. She is a senior research data scientist, lead scientist, AI and quantum computing at Booz Allen Hamilton, an American government and military contractor specializing in intelligence. I want to thank all 3 of you for being here with us today and for lending your expertise to this timely conversation. Let's get started. I'm going to start broadly and then work our way towards climate and energy. So the first question I'd like to ask is, do you see women gaining ground in the aerospace sector? Who wants to start? I'm going to pick Elise.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think the answer is yes. I think we can see as time goes on and there's much more support for women in STEM programs worldwide. I've now seen it in a few different countries myself. There is this support and this push to have women at all levels of education and getting into the industry as well. There are excellent programs at university level and at school level to try and encourage girls and women to be interested in this kind of area. And I think as well, from what is happening in aerospace today, our push to go back to the moon, our push to go onto Mars, the wonderful observations we get of the Earth and of our solar system and of space beyond that. There's so much there to capture the interest, and I think there's a lot. It's a very broad answer, but there's a lot being done to capitalize on that and capture the interest and really, show the pathways through, to the state that, yeah, you might end up with a PhD in aerospace engineering.
Jacqueline, what do you see from the university perspective?
I do agree. I think that women have been gaining traction on the university side as well. I've actually seen it all the way down to the high school K through 12 level as well. At our university, we have high school programs where students come and learn about aviation and aerospace engineering. And even in those programs, we are starting to see a half and half in gender participation, whereas 10 years ago, you saw maybe 5% participation from females, which I think is significant because it starts getting their interest early. Our faculty have increased at my university has increased sixfold in the number of female professors within our department. And I say that because there used to be 0 and now we have 6. So that's also very exciting. And that's all happened within the past few years. And of course, you're also seeing a lot of representation of aerospace professionals, women in industry as well. So I think it is increasing, and I just hope that we can continue to support more women in academia and industry.
Okay, let's pivot to the topic at hand. And Anna, I'm going to start with you. What is your current research and work, and how does it help our knowledge about climate change?
So currently I am a technology and innovation advisor, both within my firm and for my clients. So what that means is that I help figure out, at the intersection of specifically climate and AI, how can I help a client go from point A, where they are currently, to point B, where they want to be in the future with their climate innovation, figure out what innovations they need to get from point A to point B, and help them roadmap along the way. So that's my main role, a heavy focus on clean energy, climate, and then how AI and quantum computing can help those innovations.
Great. Let's go to Elise.
Yeah, so I am a senior scientist and technical project manager. And what that means is I lead projects and also develop our research roadmap in the area of climate and power grid resilience. So basically, I'm trying to understand the effects of climate change on our energy system from generation, like the wind turbines in the picture behind me, through to end users, like all of you in your homes or in businesses or other infrastructure. And so we need to ensure that as we try and meet our climate targets, net zero, staying below 1.5 degrees of warming, and as we electrify our energy system and increase our use of renewable energy, we can also deal with the impacts of long-term climate trends as well as worsening extreme events. And I don't have to tell all of you in the US how serious these kinds of events can be. You've seen more than your fair share in the last months alone. So it's really critical for us to try and understand how we keep the lights on.
Right. And Jacqueline?
Yeah, so I am an assistant professor at University of California, Irvine. And that role involves teaching research and service. On the research side, my research is on aircraft systems and the environment. And so it touches upon, at system level, how various components about not only the aircraft, but also air traffic control, how it operates with respect to the airport and between airports, etc., how those systems can be modified or changed in order to have less environmental impact. And I'm looking at not only in renewable energy or just alternative energy sources, reducing emissions and CO2 output, but also looking at noise as well. So I do a lot of research on community noise. How can we reduce that for people who live in around airports as well? And that goes for current aviation, so our current commercial tube and wing aircraft, and then future aviation topics. So some of the new industries that are currently up and coming, such as advanced air mobility. And of course, I also teach these concepts in my classes to my students. So I teach a class about the topic along with just general aircraft performance topics as well.
So Jacqueline, how has the aerospace industry and academic research changed in recent years?
I would say it's become one of the biggest contributors to recent aerospace conferences, research grant opportunities. We have large entities such as NASA that are releasing strategic goals, and I would say the goals are pretty substantial, aggressive, I should say, but I think that's positive because it's going to help drive the research and drive the industry towards a direction of reduced environmental impacts.
What would be an example of one of those goals, just so we can wrap our heads around it?
Sure. So for example, one large goal is a reduction in noise from aircraft on approach and departure from airports by about 50 decibels of noise. Now that's a lot of noise reduction. It's almost unfathomable. But actually, if you look at very substantially different aircraft designs than what we currently fly today, we actually do see that that can be in the realm of possibility. But it will require a lot of drastic change. Now, along with those other goals, such as reduced CO2, reduced NOx production as well, also have to be in line. So we want to see reductions in all of those areas, not just one and potentially a detriment in the other. So it's aggressive, but I think it's what the industry needs to really innovate moving forward.
Anna, what are you seeing in industry?
So I'm seeing more and more companies realizing the fact that climate is going to play a central role in the health and longevity of their businesses. So a lot more companies are kind of building in climate preparedness, ESG metrics into their business as a core function of their business. So that's really promising. We're also seeing that there's a huge government push, both in the US as well as internationally, for a big push to solve major climate challenges. And so the combination of industry providing all these opportunities for people interested in climate and also innovation in climate, as well as coupled with governments pushing it as well, I think there's going to be a lot of promising innovation in this area.
And Elise, what are you seeing from the global and research perspective?
I think that aerospace really gets a bit of an unfair spotlight in this domain when we start to look at the overall carbon or greenhouse gas emissions that we have and the sectors that we want to decarbonize. So everyone goes, well, we shouldn't be flying, it's a huge pollutant, but really global aviation is only 1% to 2% of global emissions. There are easier sectors to decarbonize first. The challenges that Jacqueline mentioned, they are not easy to solve. They are very difficult to solve. And it's so much more than just reducing emissions, as she mentioned. So I think we need to put more focus as the general public first on the sectors that are easier to decarbonize, while also supporting the efforts in the sectors that we know might take 10, 20 plus years to reach those goals. So that's where, we start with energy and we start with ground transport. Then, we start with buildings, heating and cooling, and then we move on and try and really tackle the challenges that, it's not because we just want to delay it, but really because the challenges are going to take some time to find those solutions. And I have all faith that we will get there eventually, but it just needs the effort and it needs to begin now.
So how does your aerospace training help in all these other fields that weren't aerospace related to climate that you just mentioned? And I'd love all of you to touch on that.
So for me, I think aerospace engineering gives fantastic training in some very difficult mathematical and physical concepts. So we have a very good basis for then, future learning and future discoveries. And these are also widely applicable in other domains. So in the end, the physics and the maths are the same. It's just applied differently. So in my PhD, I was lucky to do experimental and numerical simulation work. There was lots of interesting physics and chemistry. I was looking at spacecraft re-entry. And I also learned how to be a researcher. So how to learn new concepts quickly, how to apply them in different ways to find a good solution, how to see the bigger picture when working really into the details. And so from there, I wanted to go into industry to get closer to the products that we see in real life that people are using that are hopefully making a difference and an improvement somehow. And when I was hired for my first industry role at ABB Research, so I started there and then shifted to Hitachi, both in similar fields in energy. I was hired for my background in thermodynamics and heat transfer, which was the specialty from my PhD. And though the applications were different, I went in and then I found a real interest in the energy transformation towards renewables, towards electrification, working on sustainability, working on green technologies such as batteries and fuel cells and electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So it's been a fantastic journey. I found a way, you know, to bring in my personal interest in climate change into my work at ABB first. And then I got my current role at Hitachi Energy 2 years ago and made it my professional focus. So now basically I manage the big picture and I have my team of experts that work on all the details. And really the key for me is having transferable skills, being eager to learn new things and solve all types of problems. And really all are welcome and really, really wanted to work in climate, and not just in technical fields, but far beyond, in business, in policy, in art, in community action, whatever it is that your own specialty is, something that you can bring, it's needed in this fight. So there's a lot of opportunities ahead.
You know, I'll add on to what, go
okay.
ahead, Jacqueline, if you want to go.
No, you can go ahead, it's fine.
Thanks, Jacqueline.
No worries.
Elise put it beautifully. Like, you know, it's about learning the foundation, the science, the physics, the math, the chemistry. That foundation provides a springboard for so many different things you can do afterwards. So in my case, I did my PhD thesis on in-space propellants and looking at the chemistry of ignition. So I was also doing computational and experimental work, and those really complemented each other. And what I ended up doing was applying those same concepts for my postdoc. So for my postdoc, I was at the National Renewable Energy Labs, and I was using the same techniques and the same foundational science that I was applying for in-space propellants, but I was applying to ground transportation fuels. So looking at the ignition chemistry of ground transportation fuels using similar techniques. And so there's a lot of transferable skills, as Elise mentioned for herself, in that itself. And another thing that I think is really useful for having this background in aerospace is that, you know, you learn, you know, the industry, you get to understand how people think and how people act in that kind of industry. And so when you transfer to a different industry, say from aerospace into energy, you have that background of how they operate. And so for me in my career currently, I'm able to leverage that understanding to promote collaborations, partnerships, to promote more innovation in these areas. So I think that's also a really useful skill from my PhD.
Thank you. I think both Anna and Elise also put it beautifully. I'll add one last small point here, which is that I'm sure anyone who's had to work through the design of an airplane before, it's a very difficult problem in the beginning. In fact, I often say to my students that an airplane is it's a device that almost doesn't work. And it really requires you to go above and beyond in figuring out how to squeeze out the lightest, most fuel efficient structures in order for us to be able to travel further and further, which naturally has implications towards wanting to reduce emissions, wanting to reduce the things that we don't need and which are going to be polluting the environment. So I think it goes hand in hand, interestingly enough, when you think about it from an aircraft design perspective as well.
Great. How has the booming space economy had an impact on research and innovation? Anna, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, for sure. So that question, one thing kind of pops into mind when we're talking about climate specifically, and that's the fact that we're having kind of an exponential increase in the amount of satellite technology deployment. And what that technology deployment is doing is it's bringing us a ton of data about the Earth, the climate, our energy systems. And one of the biggest challenges is that there's so much data that researchers aren't able to effectively and efficiently handle that data yet. So a lot of work is going into how do we handle this much data and how do we gain valuable insights from that data that we can then act on as far as, you know, climate change initiatives, as far as, you know, making a more robust grid, like through grid modernization, things like that. And a lot of that is leveraging things like data science and AI. So there's a lot of skills that are kind of interplaying. And so that's one major impact I'm thinking at the top of my head. And there's other impacts as well For instance, advancements in certain technologies for space exploration, such as solar photovoltaics, have also a really important application on Earth. And so there's also this kind of natural collaboration that happens, kind of this dual purpose technology between clean energy sector for photovoltaics specifically and space exploration. So there's that fun impact as well from the booming space economy.
Interesting. Jacqueline, Elise, do you have anything to add or insights on that?
Perhaps just another example, I think, yeah, absolutely. The climate data, there's so much and so many interesting things that, are yet to come with that, I think. And one example in Europe is the European Space Agency has a lot of programs to work across industries. So really how to link space with energy, with economics, with manufacturing, with, all sorts of things. So it's really interesting to see as well the need for these interdisciplinary projects and how to collaborate and go forward with this in mind as well. So really interesting to see. It's quite new, I think, but something that, it will be needed more and more to share knowledge between different domains.
So how do you see aerospace technologies and applications helping to better understand climate change and its impact?
So I think Anna already covered the fact that, we understand our planet vastly from taking images and measurements from space. We're able to chart global temperatures, greenhouse gas concentrations, changing weather patterns, water and ice, and also mapping of disasters, ahead of when they occur and when they do occur. And the comprehensive climate models that are built by a global network of researchers and underpin the IPCC reports that you may have seen, they all depend on data captured from space. So it's extremely critical. Without Earth observation, we wouldn't have anywhere near as good of an understanding of our own planet and what could potentially happen to it in the future. And Anna also touched on the fact that, there are many technologies developed first for space that are at the heart of the transformation in the energy and transport sectors and their fight against climate change. So solar panels for sure, lithium batteries, fuel cells, direct air capture of carbon dioxide, all of these were developed for spaceflight. And when they first started, the budget from NASA was immense and they just said, make us something that worked. And now the challenge on the ground is, to take them, to make them more efficient, to make them more affordable, to be able to scale them for mass production. So again, it's a partnership between developing at the cutting edge of these technologies in universities, and then in companies like mine, being able to take them to the market. And some are also moving from space into aviation, which is really exciting too.
Jacqueline, what do you see from your point of view in terms of technologies that will help us understand or address climate change?
Yeah, I think Elise summed it up very well. The first thing I thought of as you mentioned that question was, again, just the different monitoring systems that we now have and can utilize in order to understand what's happening to the planet. And I think those other devices that she mentioned towards the very end here have very recently been looked at towards applicability in the commercial aviation sector as well. And those things are going to, I hope, be utilized to reduce the impact of aviation on climate change. And through that, and in turn, I think it's going to have an impact not only on just aviation, but the other industries that support aviation, various transport industries, et cetera, as well, which I think will also be utilizing those technologies, such as battery technologies, for example. infrastructure that also supports aviation, such as airports, as we mentioned. There's research looking into carbon capture around airports as well. And so those things I think are all going to contribute.
So Anna, I'll pivot to you to go even deeper into that question in terms of aviation and aerospace is often looked at as a contributor to climate change, and what are the technologies being used to address those concerns?
Yeah, and this is one of the questions I talk a lot about with my clients and at my firm. But yeah, so when we consider aviation, the metric I use is 12% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US are from the aviation sector. So that's not an insignificant amount. And so, and also on the space side, a Falcon 9 launch, I think is equivalent to 200 cars on the road for a year, or about 400 transatlantic flights. So also not insignificant. So these are huge impacts on our climate that we need to address. And so first, with aviation, I think there's so many really wonderful technologies, coming online. I know Elias mentioned earlier, it's a hard sector to decarbonize, but there's really cool technologies to keep an eye out for, different aircraft technologies. So the first of which is electric aviation. This is one that I think is really promising for those regional flights of less than 500 miles. So there's a really large market for it. I think about 45% of all US flights are under that 500-mile range. So there's a huge market for this electric aviation. And many of the electric aviation companies out there are projecting within the next decade, you should see it on the tarmac. So that's a really cool technology. The second technology in aviation that I think is really promising, but it's not a new technology, it's sustainable aviation fuel. So SAF, as we like to call it. And SAF is like I said, it's not a new technology, but it's something that, a lot of airlines are committing to using 100% SAF, or, figuring out ways to make SAF work for the near term while we're waiting for other technologies to come online. So that's a really promising technology as well. And then the third is hydrogen powered aircraft. And so this is a longer term view for aviation technology. It's not going to come online potentially for a few decades, hopefully sooner, but there's a lot of technological obstacles and questions to answer there. But this is going to be solving the question of how do we, cover those long-term flights in a sustainable way. And so hydrogen power aircraft are going to be a potential technology in that area. So that's aviation. And then on the space side, we have, we can kind of think about it in the life cycle of, for say, a rocket. So we can think of it as like, we start with manufacturing and transportation, and then we have a launch, and then we have our in-space use. And then after that, we have our descent and end of life or reuse. So starting with manufacturing and transportation, there's a lot of really good technologies that are being applied for improved manufacturing technologies that reduce our energy usage and climate impacts that are being enacted for all different industries, not just space. So we see technology advancements there. And then on transportation, we can see adoption of electric or alternatively fueled vehicles being used for transport of parts, which we know can be quite a long way for them to go from point A to point B. Then we can consider launch. And so there's many companies that are looking into propulsion systems that leverage cleaner fuels that can be sustainably produced, such as methane, instead of high emission fossil fuels products like kerosene. So there's solutions for launch. And then we talk about in-space, and in-space debris is a huge topic now. And so there's a lot of consideration for policymakers to hold companies and people sending materials up into space, whether it be a satellite or et cetera, to hold them more accountable for the debris they're putting in space, and potentially requiring them to, at the end of the lifetime of that satellite, for instance, make sure that it is properly deorbited. And so companies like Astroscale are providing really cool innovations to enable that kind of removal of space debris. So that's in space. And then once we count like the last sector would be the descent and the reuse. I think Elise can talk a little bit more about reentry than I can, but talking about reuse, we see a lot of companies now building launch vehicles for reuse, specifically to make them more affordable, but also this is good for the environment at the same time. So I like with everything I mentioned in aviation and the space, there's a lot of really cool technologies happening, but it will require more innovation and effort to see more of those solutions deploy.
Great. Good perspectives. I want to quickly ask all three of you two questions. What motivated you to pursue aerospace, and what did the AE Fellowship mean to you? I'm going to start with Jacqueline, and then Anna, and then Elise.
Sure, happy to start. So what motivated me to pursue aerospace was the first question.
Yes.
Okay. So I will say that I've long been enthralled by flying vehicles or the idea of flying ever since I was a child. While I can't point to a specific family member or friend that inspired that interest, an interesting thing to note is actually Amelia herself was a big role model to me when I was a kid. And so I desired to be a pilot just like her. Now, I actually do have my pilot's license, but when I realized that aerospace engineering was a thing, and not only can I fly the aircraft, but I can build them as well, that was very interesting. Now, I will say as well that as a young girl, it wasn't necessarily something that I got a lot of support for when I was young, but I did notice that once I started college, once I started the major itself, I actually got a lot of support from not only my peers but also my professors, who I think were part of the motivators that kept me going in doing the education itself. And it also tied into my overall interest. I had an interest in long time in green energy. Aviation and green energy were hot topics as I was coming up into in my education, and those were all very interesting to me. So I think that's the answer to that question. And then the second question was
What did
about
the
the
AE
Amelia Earhart Fellowship.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that the Amelia Earhart Fellowship really meant to me was that, maybe we are meant to be here. And I say we, I'm referring to we as females in particular, because as I was moving up into my graduate school to PhD, that was the imposter syndrome was very real. I did start to notice that fewer and fewer of my peers were women like I was, and it's an interesting question that you start to ask yourself. But something I also learned about even just learning styles between men and women, there's actually been a lot of research into how men and women learn, take, and receive feedback, and then in turn think about themselves as having the potential to be successful or not. And women might not always, if they aren't getting feedback, they might not always perceive themselves as being good if the lack of feedback is almost is a negative sign to them. And so getting feedback in that sense, being able to win a fellowship devoted to women in aviation, that's a huge inspiration towards someone who's pursuing a PhD degree. And so that was it was great meaning towards me as well. I was also not very I did not have a lot of money at that time. I was paying for loans. So that was also very, very helpful.
Great. Anna, we'll go to you.
Yeah. So how I first got interested in aviation, it was a very interesting path, but kind of starts with when I was a kid. I would make airplanes out of whatever I could find. One that comes to mind is I used all the parts of a Reese's wrapper to make an airplane, properly balance it, and then toss it off the banister and see how far it would go. I don't think they really went far, but that was part of the beginning of my engineering career, pretty much, was those my Reese's wrapper paper airplane. But going into college, I honestly didn't know any engineers. It wasn't something that was on my radar. So I went into college hoping to become a medical doctor, and which is a wonderful path. But it took me doing some internships, being encouraged by really wonderful female mentors and male mentors at the university to apply for certain fellowships and internships. And, I started out with an internship at NASA, and that's really where I got interested in propulsion. I was obsessed with chemistry, still am, I love it. I was chemical engineering major, and here I am looking at like this really powerful and impactful use of chemistry, referring to a rocket engine. And so that's how I started getting more and more into the aerospace side. I did a second internship with NASA where I pursued alternative aviation fuels, which is a passion till this day, where I really got to understand how chemistry intersects with the aviation and aerospace field. And so it was because of these experiences and also wonderful mentors and supporters along the way, where I went on to do a Fulbright, pursue research in this area, specifically aviation propulsion. Then I went to grad school, do a PhD in very chemistry heavy, looking at in-space propellants, like I was mentioning earlier, and then continuing that trend of applying my interest and expertise in chemistry and aviation over into kind of the clean energy arena, looking at, alternative fuels for aviation applications, alternative fuels in general, looking at, green aviation technologies and such. So yeah, it all started from a young age. I like looking back, hindsight is 2020. I saw the signs early that I was going to be an engineer, but it took some really wonderful mentors and scholarships like the Amelia Earhart Scholarship to help me realize and to encourage me that, yeah, this is where I should be. So that leads into the second question. So getting the Amelia Earhart Fellowship was really meaningful to me. Not only does it provide some financial freedom for women pursuing graduate degrees, which allows you to either further pursue the research that they're doing, or other skills such as leadership, which is, kind of where my interest went, as far as, opening up that kind of mental space and extra time to devote to other activities to further develop a successful career. So for me, that was really valuable. Also, just as Jacqueline had mentioned, it was a really good reminder that I do belong here, and I do belong working as a female engineer in a very male-dominated arena. So that was wonderful to have that positive reinforcement there, to be rewarded for my hard work and the successes that I had up until that point. And also, it's such oh, sorry. I was just going to mention, it was such a wonderful group of women too, such a wonderful network to leverage. But I'll leave it at that.
Elise?
Yes, I saw that you wanted to move on to the Q&A, so I'll be very brief. I'll summarize mine very quickly. I was fascinated by space, full stop, loved it, thought it was super interesting, tried to find a way, I was always interested in maths and science, and I tried to find a way to put the two together. And for me, that path was also aerospace engineering. And I have always wanted to do something that had a positive impact on the world, as I'm sure all of you do. And for me, that was using the technical skills that I gained through my degrees. And now that's what I'm trying to put into practice. And receiving the fellowship, I mean, Jacqueline and Anna said it beautifully, and all I can really add is that, yeah, to be recognized by such an esteemed organization is a wonderful feeling, and something that, to win it at probably the toughest point of my PhD, it got me over the line in the end. It got me to the end and made me believe that I could do it. And I reflect on it today. It's still a great source of pride and inspiration. And, I think about that when I have something challenging that I want to complete, and it helps to show me that I can do it.
Great. I want to thank you again for all of your insights and expertise. The three of you have been just wonderful. We're now going to open the conversation to questions from our audience. So if you have a question, please enter it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and Megan is going to read the questions for our panelists.
Thanks, Catherine. So we do, excuse me, we do have a few questions in here, and I just want to acknowledge in the chat, we have a number of other AE fellows from other award years that have joined us. So thank you all for being here as well. So our first question is, why does the astrophysics industry have a low rate of success, and getting into university under this program is hard? I assume she means specifically talking about women. So why do you think it's harder for women to get into these programs and to achieve success?
I can start out. Did someone else want to talk? Okay, I can start out. I think these days there's a lot of really good support at the university level for female women pursuing, careers in STEM. And unfortunately, there still is a lot of this unconscious bias playing in once you get out of university, and still at the university level a little bit, but you're a little bit more cushioned. Once you go out into industry, there's a lot more at stake, a lot more at play, I should say, when it comes to being a woman in engineering. And there's a lot of really wonderful mentors, a lot of really wonderful support structures. But in industry, things move quickly, and sometimes it depends on the company you're working for, whether they prioritize DE&I initiatives or not. And there's just different levels that, different workplaces will have of support for women in engineering. And so it's important to take a look at, where the good paths, so to speak, are to go for women, where they have that support, where they have equal opportunity, equal pay, and all the good stuff like that. So that's one thing that there's room for improvement for sure, but one thing we pay attention to, because when we find those paths, and once we find those supportive work environments where women do feel welcomed and feel like they can be fully themselves, that's when we're going to find more retention of women in these fields. And also, kind of is a reciprocal thing. So if someone is much more encouraged in their field, they're going to go up the ladder, have more women in leadership. Representation matters, and so that'll encourage others to feel comfortable in pursuing a career in that area. So that was just some scattered thoughts there, but I'll feel free to, Jacqueline or Elise, to jump in.
We can go to the next question. I think that was a good summary, and I appreciate that. So our next question is actually from our immediate past president and a two-time Amelia Earhart Fellow herself, Sharon. Sharon asked how you see drones in monitoring.
I think a quick answer to that one is drones themselves are that's actually one of the use cases that are currently being proposed and actually currently being used as we speak with drones. So for small vehicles that can travel into small places, we already use them for inspection, for example. It's used for camera work, for example. And larger scale drones that can be left in atmosphere for several days have also already been designed. So those are also there, and they work for monitoring tasks as well. Drones can actually be very good, even in comparison to a person flying a vehicle and doing the monitoring task. So I will say they're already currently in use, and I think that it's going to be one of the primary use cases for drones as well.
I have some examples from the energy industry that are interesting. We use them for monitoring of remote equipment, so substations, power lines, towers, that kind of thing that are in the desert, in rural areas, in areas that are basically hard to get to for operators. So we can try and have a look at the state of the equipment and see what maintenance needs to be done. We're also using them for damage assessment following disasters or extreme events. So that's something that, again, from a power system perspective, we can go out and look at what infrastructure is damaged, how badly, is there a tree on the lines, is it completely flooded, has a fire passed through, and then plan the repair operations as such. And of course, that example, I narrowed it to power systems, but obviously within a disaster environment, there's a lot more at stake, a lot more important things than just infrastructure. So there as well, there's a huge need. So very interesting. And I think, the improvements in the technology have been immense. So it's really something that can be deployed widely and for so many different applications today.
Yeah, and I just want to bounce off one of the things that Elise mentioned. So there's some power lines behind our house, and we'll get a text and like, oh, there's going to be a drone, going to look at the power lines, exactly what you're saying, to make sure, everything is good, instead of sending, a person or a vehicle that might disrupt, regular activities. It's just a really easy deployable solution for that kind of thing. I've also seen startups pitching using drone technology to understand, fire risk, fire mitigation, fire prevention in the Western United States. And so, that's another really cool, again, leveraging, like Jacqueline mentioned, the new cameras, the different sensors they have. I think there's a lot of really good uses there.
Great. Thank you for the real examples. I think that really helps bring it into perspective for our audience. Our next question is from Holly. She's the current chair of the Amelia Earhart Fellowship Committee and a past fellow herself as well. And she asked, how are corporations and universities encouraging and mentoring women to enter non-traditional disciplines and grow in their careers? And as a follow-up, has COVID affected the amount of support and mentorship for women?
I can start with that one. So within my company, we have a global women's network, and we also have local women's networks. I'm an active member in the Germany, Austria, Switzerland region. And so, we plan events, we have webinars, we have in-person events, we share things through the network to try and encourage and support the women that are within the company. So I think it's been a really valuable thing to be a part of, and it's growing and growing. So that's fantastic. And, we're trying to look for ways to get even more support and visibility within the company. And again, it's not just about women joining, it's also about men joining and trying to really get everybody to be champions for the women in the company. And what we try and do, at least here in Switzerland, we're heavily involved in mentoring with the universities and research institutions in the country. So I myself have been involved in programs with ETH, which is the Polytechnic University in Zurich, as well as with a wide range of the various institutes to support women that are, for example, going from PhDs and looking for how to go into industry. So we try and give our real world examples and the pros and cons, the highs and lows of what it's like to be in industry and how they can find an avenue there, as well as supporting master's students and also bachelor level students in their project work. And there's a lot more women that we see in energy. It's great because I think the climate and environment focus, it's something that seems to attract a lot of women, which I think is fantastic. And you can see through the quality of work and the diversity of ideas that it's very important. So we're always trying to look for new programs, how to support women better and better. With COVID, I think luckily for us, it's actually made the situation better. My company has instituted flexible working for everybody permanently. So it's now completely up to you, and you know, obviously with your responsibilities in your job, how much you want to work at home and how much you want to be in the office. So I think that's a great benefit for many people. And these programs actually, because we're quite a new company, we got we basically changed hands from one company to the other. So our piece, Hitachi Energy, is quite new, and so the Women's Network started during COVID. It started all virtually, and now is growing into something that we can do in person as well. So for us, not a hindrance, but maybe a opportunity.
And I'll add on just a little bit to what Elise says. So my company also has, you know, Women's Network, really wonderful resource, mentoring programs within and outside of the firm. But one other thing, a couple other things that I think is really valuable to supporting women in their careers is just providing transparent promotion trajectories, transparent salaries, just having these processes really transparent throughout the process is just, it is invaluable to a woman's career. It reduces that pay gap. It reduces the broken rung, as some of you may be familiar with that term, for women to get into leadership roles. So things like that are really helpful as well.
We'll touch on one last thing too on the academia side. I think recently I've also seen a lot more support coming in for graduate students who are interested in pursuing academic careers. One thing I had the opportunity to participate in was a Women in Academia workshop and conference when I was maybe about a year out from starting to apply, where they talked about, I thought very realistic and relatable topics having to do with the challenges of being a female in academia. It goes beyond, we do have some traditional challenges that have often been talked about. I've been told in the past that if you wanted to have children while you were in your tenure track, be sure to have them in the summer so that no one knows and it's a secret. And I think a lot of those attitudes have actually changed recently, which is very pleasant to see. But then there's some other things as well. For example, one thing I do notice is that because women in our field are few, we get asked to do a lot of things, you know, for the sake of having a woman voice in a committee. But for academia, that actually can be a detriment simply because you're asked to do so many things. And the conferences, as like the one I mentioned that it is perfectly okay to say no and prioritize what you really want to spend time on, and then go forth from there. So that was just some interesting perspectives that I had the opportunity to receive. I relay all those things to my own graduate students. I have a lot of females in my lab that I work with, because they're just things that aren't necessarily always talked about. But when you have those perspectives to offer, it really does give a lot of support to people who are considering those careers.
Thank you all. That was some great input on that question. I think we have time for one more question. Unfortunately, we've got more than we have time for, but this has been a really fabulous conversation. So I'm going to take the last question from Anna Maria in Italy. And she said, in traditional aerospace engineering degrees, especially at the bachelor's level, innovative technologies are not taught at all. We focus on traditional subjects. What can be done to allow young university students, especially young women, to learn about innovative technologies and to give them the opportunity to partake in such research? So I don't know, maybe if we want to start with you, Jacqueline, since you're in academia.
Sure, I can start with this, and this is a very good point and something that my university has been thinking about. We have all of the new professors who come in. One of the things that we're tasked with doing is creating a new course based off of things that we research. And so my new course I created was a course on aviation and the environment, where a part of the class is that the students have to go and research some topic related to aviation and environment and then propose solutions based off of research they do to that. And I've actually had students do that project and actually go present them at conferences. I think one of them is going to be a journal paper pretty soon. These are student written projects from a class assignment. And I think those types of classes, they're not necessarily required, but if we can encourage the students to, take another class here. I know that's a big thing to ask given how busy an aerospace bachelor's degree tends to be. But I think one thing we're also trying to do is condense some of the fundamentals so that we can encourage more of that technical elective content that gets into those new topics. Encouraging the faculty to create those new classes, I think, is also very useful for that.
Yeah, I think there's a great opportunity here for industry to support as well what the universities are teaching. So I've been lucky enough to be part of a program where, the university brings in industry mentors, and we basically, the subject is quite an open topic, and we basically say, this is what is interesting to us right now. And between all the companies that were there, it was really batteries, renewable energy generation, local use of electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, hydrogen, climate change, all this type of stuff. So for the students, I think it gave a really fantastic look at what is at the forefront of industry, what is on our minds right now, and gave them something to work on that in, I think, all the project cases, it was an open-ended question. For us, it was about trying to show them something that was interesting and let them show us what they find interesting about it as well. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there for industry to be involved in this and work closely with academia. In the end, it only benefits us because all of those students are going to graduate and hopefully come and work for us one day.
I love that idea. Unfortunately, it's all the time we have for questions today. I hope that everyone here has enjoyed today's conversation. I'm going to invite you all to support future women in aerospace and space sciences like Jacqueline, Elise, and Anna, and ensure they're ready to lead the way into the future with a gift to the Amelia Earhart Fellowship Fund at zonta.org/donate. If each of us donated $25 across Zonta, the fund would be fully funded. So please donate to the Amelia Earhart Fellowship Fund at zonta.org/donate. If you have any additional questions, please email programs@zonta.org. We will share a recording of today's session on the Zonta International website. Thank you again, panelists, for your participation and your insights. Everyone else, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day, and let's celebrate Amelia Earhart this month. Thank you.